You know, I'm going to give you a history lesson.
We got some dumbass motherfuckers floating around this country.
Stop laughing! And when I do, start.
Also, y'all did some nasty-ass jokes on my ass, too.
Funny jokes and unfunny jokes come out of the same birth.
You f***ing guys are unbelievable.
Why are you laughing?
Evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Why Are You Laughing, a history of comedy podcast. And today, I am pleased to introduce to you Joe Rogan versus Marc Maron on the WTF podcast. I'm not sure if this will be a bonus episode or on the free feed eventually. We'll see. It fits more with a lot of the bonus episodes we do, like Opie and Anthony or Howard Stern or Ron and Fez, where we kind of break down one single radio segment. But the reason I thought this topic was interesting is because I think it applies so much to what's happening today with Rogan and Maron. So we're pre-recording this by a while. If you want early access to episodes right when we record them, become a member on Patreon or YouTube. But if you're listening to this for free later, I don't know if Marc Maron is still on his tour around the country bashing Joe Rogan. I think HBO must be a little annoyed because they're like, hey, promote the special a little. No one knows you're doing it. They just think you're on a crusade to ruin Joe Rogan and the Austin comedy scene.
Yeah.
But Maron has a real bee in his bonnet about Joe Rogan and the Austin crew. And I said, I swear these guys have talked before. So let me see where this beef originated. And sure enough, Joe Rogan was on an episode of WTF back 14 years ago, I think, in the very early days of WTF, when Maron and Rogan started to have successful podcasts, but nowhere near what it became. It was still at a time where people were like, oh, you got a little podcast. That's good. You're making a little money there. That's cute. And a lot of people did not foresee what it was becoming the way these two guys did, two of the real innovators of the podcast game. So Maron said something in a recent interview that we broke down on the Blind Mike Project that made me think this beef has a lot more to do with personal stuff than politics. And sure enough, going back into this episode, it solidified that, I think, in a lot of ways. So we'll examine here today, and we'll look back at the episode and also talk about how it impacts kind of the modern construct of what the comedy scene is, both in Austin and elsewhere. So if you enjoy today's episode, if it ends up being a free episode, then consider becoming a member, because you get episodes like this, bonus episodes, where we break down radio segments and a little more obscure stuff than you're used to seeing on the free feed, or just support the show for free. We appreciate that as well, wherever you get podcasts. BlindMike.net is where you can find all of our links. That's where we're on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get podcasts. If you're watching this on YouTube, like, subscribe, comment. It helps the algorithm. It helps more people find the show. We appreciate that as well. So blindmike.net is where you can find all those links. So let's get into it. Because like I said, Craig and I have talked about this a lot, and I mean a lot. And now perhaps it's because we've talked about it and our phones are always listening to us that it's every Instagram video I have now. But every day I'm like, there's no way Maron's on another podcast bashing Rogan. It's all he talks about. It's crazy.
Right.
So, but I do think there's a point to what Maron is saying. And last year, the version of this that we got was Anthony Jeselnik going on every podcast in America talking about how you can't you aren't allowed to bash Joe Rogan in the Austin comedy scene. It's amazing they've been able to get away with it for this long. Somebody should alert Joe. Like I said, Maron said something to Bobby Lee and Andrew Santino about the first time he met Joe. And he said he didn't like, athletic or good-looking guys in comedy because he's like, hey, this is our thing. This is for the freaks. This is for people on the fringes. And so I think that's where the real bitterness stems from. But they'll get into it further on into this podcast. But let's start early on in their first real encounter, their first conversation, as they kind of put it.
It was weird that you tweeted something and you said we've known each other for years, but we've never had a conversation.
Never really have.
It's weird, right?
Yeah, it's real.
I mean, I've had a relationship with you in my mind. I remember when you started doing comedy, I think.
I remember very much when I started doing comedy.
Was it 88, 87?
88, August 27th.
Really? You know the date?
Yeah.
I remember you showed up at Stitches
Seems like Mark does too, by the way.
Yeah, I was going to say that you, I'd been doing comedy maybe 5 or 6 months.
Yeah.
And you were already an established professional comedian, and you came up to me at the Comedy Connection and you gave me some really nice advice and a compliment, and it fired me up, and I was really excited. Yeah.
Do you remember what I said?
I would have to be paraphrasing, but you were saying something along the lines of, you're doing really great stuff. Keep with it, stay original, keep writing, just keep doing it. And
I wonder if I that's one of those things, because I remember, when I first saw you, I had this problem with guys who were, athletically oriented or had some sort of athletic nature about them before they came into comedy. And I remember that you and Kevin Flynn, he was like a soccer guy.
Yeah.
And you were a kickboxing champion. And there was part of me that was like, this is not for them. This is not their world. Why are they here? Why don't they stay in their competitive world?
Well, that's silly.
Well, of course it's silly, but you were sort of a cocky fuck then, weren't you?
Well, I was definitely a lot different than I am now, but I was right. It was literally not even removed from fighting. I was still.
So you can tell Maron thinks a lot more about Joe than Joe thinks of Maron. Since he started comedy, Maron's been like, who is this guy? Who is this fuck? Fuck him. Like, Maron's always had Joe Rogan stuck in his craw since the early days. And here's why I've taken on this. I have so many thoughts about this Maron Rogan beef. And people will respond in the comments sometimes and be like, hey, Maron's right about Joe. I don't think that's untrue. I think Maron makes points about Joe that are accurate. But here's where I'll always defend Rogan, is Maron has a problem with like the concept of who Joe Rogan is on the surface. Which Maron's his whole political belief is that you shouldn't judge people that way. Like, it's kind of a crazy way to think about someone when you're this progressive, thoughtful guy. So the idea that to judge Rogan based on the first interaction they had, where you're like, oh, he's athletic and he gets gigs in Hollywood, so fuck him. That seems like a very basic way and a lack of nuance way to think of someone. And so that's the problem I've always had with Maron's thought process, is there doesn't seem to be a deeper level to it. It's just on the surface, I shouldn't like Joe, and I'm going to come up with reasons over the next 15, 20 years as to why I don't like him.
Next we got Clean Rogan.
So the only other person I've heard this from is Andy Dick, which I don't know how they talk about Andy Dick's perception of this, but Maron kind of says that back in the day, before Rogan was smoking weed and everything, he judged people who lived their life, on the wild side.
I guess the thing that I responded to, too, because I know this in my own self, and it probably is some reflection on me, is that when I first met you, you were very focused, you were very together, you come from this, competitive environment and this competitive mindset. You were a professional, or at least a champion of what you did, and there was a certain element to you that was you were sort of like, you definitely had this idea of who you were. You had this confidence, and no one was going to fuck with that. And I think that it became a little. I think that you were a little. I remember you were very clean. You judged people that weren't doing that did drugs or drank. That you definitely
judged them, really? What do you remember that?
Well, I just remember that there was definitely a line drawn between people who were fuck ups and people weren't. I mean, is there a point? Am I misreading that? Was there a point where you were like, if you're going to fuck up your life, like you seem to have that control thing going?
I definitely did, but I don't think I was too judgmental about it. I had a lot of friends that did drugs or did drink. I had a couple friends that died from it. My best friend, when I was in my 20s, he died of. They don't know if it was heroin or coke. He had a lot of issues with drugs, and I had grown up with a buddy of mine whose cousin sold coke, and when we were in high school, I watched him deteriorate. I watched him completely fall apart.
So the early part of this podcast really felt like it felt like Maron going like, so you just fucking judge people for drinking, and Rogan's like, well, no, I mean, I did have people close to me die, but I don't think I was particularly judgmental of them. It's just it's unfortunate that their lives like it's Maron completely judging a guy that he doesn't know, and that's my whole belief on why Maron's still bitter about Rogan. It's not a personal beef where he's had a lot of interactions with Rogan and straight up doesn't like him. He's judging him from afar there's a lot of bitterness that Rogan, Maron had a little bit of a head start. Maron was getting a lot of the praise for being this innovative podcast interviewer, and he had Obama on, for God's sake. He was getting a lot of these big names, and Rogan just kind of flew by him. And you see the multi-$100 million Spotify deals, and Maron looks at that and kind of says, well, fuck him. Why is he getting that and I'm not? And it's all this surface level stuff. But when you hear these guys have a conversation, you're like, they're not that different. They don't seem, and that's ultimately what a lot of hatred and rivalries are, is like they're similar guys with just kind of opposing worldviews, I guess, but they're not all that different in the way they go about their business, which is, like I said, on the surface, you wouldn't necessarily believe that.
I do like when Maron thinks he's right, and then the person's like, no, what are you talking about?
What, do you just fucking hate everyone that drinks? And Joe's like, no. Well,
Joey Diaz is one of my best friends.
Right, yeah, like you look at the people in Joe's life, Ari, Joey Diaz, Ron White. Like Ron White's a notorious drunk.
I know. But he did clean himself up for Joe.
I suppose that's true in a way, yeah.
I think we're about to step into some of the roots of this problem in Eskimo Brothers.
Yeah, so this is again where it's like, oh, this is what it's all. It's not about Trump. It's about shit like this.
Holy fuck! I just remembered something.
What?
I just remembered that we dated the same chick.
Who?
Dorothea.
Yeah, well, sort of. I only date. We went on a few dates. She was really cool, though. She's a really nice person.
Wow,
I didn't know that you dated her. That's crazy.
Briefly,
yeah.
But I remember that there was that moment where I'm like, so what? Comics.
That's probably why you don't like me.
Maybe. I said, you ever dated? She goes, Rogan. I'm like, you fucking date Rogan? You fuck Rogan? Yeah, and then there's, but that happens. They all just came back to me.
That's funny.
I don't know. I don't think I had any spite over that. I mean, you weren't with her at the time, and
you must have.
I don't have any spite over that. I just had a repressed memory come flying out of my head, though.
And 15 years later, I'm trashing you publicly everywhere I go. But I don't think there's any animosity. Why would you say that, Joe? But it's funny that there's stuff like that, and again, you hear the vibe of forget what your politics are, or your worldview, or who you like more, who you think's a better comic. Drop all that stuff for a second. When you hear that interaction, and you hear Maron like, "Oh, we dated the same girl," and Rogan's like, "Oh, she was. I barely even remember her." One of these guys is thinking about this relationship a lot more than the other one.
Yeah.
And that's why, and you look at even their responses where, like, I think Maron has come up once on JRE, and Rogan made kind of a casual joke about it. Whereas you look at every Maron interview, and Rogan comes out and is brought up by Maron more often than not.
Yeah, and now he's made such a big deal out of it, though, that people will ask him about it.
True, for sure. Yeah, it is something worth talking to him about. But it's funny that Maron is doing this like goodbye tour. His podcast is ending after all these years, and people are like, Mark, how did you do it? You changed the industry. Tell us about it. And he's like, you believe fucking Road? They're talking about trans people in Austin. What
Brendan Schaub lives there.
Okay, Mark. Sorry to ask.
It is so funny because you're listening to this and neither of them sound like they've changed in the last decade.
No, not really. And I'll criticize Maron a little for this. I like that he's talking to Joe with an open mind. Mm-hmm. But what I don't like about Maron, and he tends to do this from time to time, I mean, most of his podcast is inherently confrontational, which I appreciate, but he couches his venom for people in a lot of ways where just the idea of him saying like, oh, you dated Rogan. You know what he's really thinking about that girl is, you dated you dated that meathead. You know what I mean? Like he's trying to have fun with it in this setting, but there's real venomous hatred there when that actually happened, just based on how he talks about this man all the time.
She immediately went from the girl he really wants to be with to a gross pig.
Get out.
The fact that Rogan got there first is probably the thorn in his side.
Well, Maron spun it as he won. He's like, I didn't give a shit.
I didn't care.
Yeah.
Why would I care? Next we have Fear Factor.
So I did forget about this, to be honest. Not obviously not that Joe hosted Fear Factor. I did forget what a cultural impact and how Fear Factor was judged because of the way things have spiraled out of control. And that might be a point for Maron, by the way. Well, like when you look at TikTok now and just how the world has changed and all the comparisons to idiocracy that our society goes through, Maron might have a point here. So I forgot how Fear Factor was judged at the time, because maybe it did in fact lead to the dumbing down of the culture. But that at the time, this is long before it was Trump and politics that were an issue. It was Fear Factor that Maron used as the reason he hated Joe Rogan so much.
I mean, if I'm going to, cop to, whatever issues I have with you that I refuse to accept are based in my completely in my my jealousy or intimidation about your
but Maron's being funny there, and he's like, hey, you know what? Maybe at the end of the day, there is some jealousy there. But then he just forgets that on this media tour he's doing. He forgets that that's a factor.
Right.
Background, or the fact that we shared a woman briefly. That there was a point where you got a job on a network television show. You were on the show for 6 years, 7 years,
5 years.
5 years.
News radio is talking.
You made a killing, and it was good. It's a good show.
It's great.
You played a guy that was very not you. You played sort of a thick dude, not that bright. Correct?
Yeah.
And then you started doing comedy again. I don't remember you doing a lot of comedy during news radio. Am I wrong?
No, I did comedy. I did have a big lapse though. When I was on news radio, I wasn't writing any. And it's one of the reasons why I kind of like re-energized my my comedy, my ambition to do comedies. When I was doing news radio, I wasn't writing any jokes. I was performing. I'd do like a set on the weekend at the Laugh Stop or at the Laugh Factory, and one at the Comedy Store. But I wasn't writing any new material.
So you know what's really interesting to think about, and we forget this because now this is, now we live 30 years after news radio was on the air, basically. Rogan was a guy that 6 years into comedy got a network TV show, had a couple other deals before that didn't work. I've heard him talk about that show Hardballs with Jim Brewer that was supposed to be a network TV show. So Joe Rogan got a couple deals early, like in his 20s. You forget that Joe Rogan was a guy like almost Matt Rife, like a guy who rocketed to success in his 20s, and people were like, "Fuck him, he doesn't deserve it. He didn't cut his teeth." So, maybe if you're younger, like our age or younger, maybe you don't even really think of that. Where like Rogan was this darling of the industry in the 90s that like real comedians hated, and they viewed him a guy that wasn't a true stand-up. And Rogan's saying, like, no, I came up and was a pure stand-up. And he admits, like, while I was on news radio, I didn't take it as seriously as I should have. But, like, he does love comedy. And so it's interesting when you hear these perspectives. I don't know. You guys leave in the comments if you think differently than I do. But stuff like this does make me be less judgmental of a guy like Matt Rife, which you saw that evolution with me when we were talking about Matt Rife, where eventually I got to the point I was like, oh, everyone just hates him because he's successful. It's got nothing to do with this guy. It's the idea of this guy that people really hate. Like, oh, he's handsome and he does crowd work and he got a level of popularity that he probably doesn't deserve. So people hate him based on that. That's not his fault. And Rogan was dealing with a lot of that when he was young.
Enlightenment, Joe.
Yeah.
And then, like, in my mind, because, like, honestly, when you said today, we've never had a conversation. So I was really assessing you as a cultural icon. That, I knew you when he started, I saw where your career went, but because we never saw each other really, except once in a while, you were the guy that I knew who started as a comic, then did the sitcom for 6 years, and then did Fear Factor for how long?
5 years.
5 years.
6 years.
I should clarify too, and I just keep interrupting because it's a long clip, so I just want to make sure we remember to say it. But I will clarify: news radio was like a sitcom that was in like 70th place. So comparing him to Matt Rife might be a bit of a stretch. So I just want to throw that out there again. It wasn't super, but I think comedians looked at that and said, like, Ray Romano got fired from that gig and they replaced him with Rogan. I think it worked out for Ray pretty well. But my point is, comics looked at that gig and were like, even though it wasn't, the biggest role in the world, it was looked at as success for a lot of those guys.
My mind is that, you come out of Fear Factor and then you're sort of, this enlightened comic, who is, pursuing the truth, and aggressive in spirit. And I'll use that word spirit again, and following the path of rebellious comics who are who were seeking to enlighten people.
And why did you fuck her before me?
No, this is where he does. It is about comedy because Maron's looking at Rogan and people calling him an enlightened comic. And the reason I specify enlightened is because Maron said it there, and he said it in every interview I've heard of his new tour that he's going on, where he's like, "Oh, these quote enlightened guys, or these enlightened meatheads," he calls them. He uses that word enlightened, and I think very deliberately, because I think he looks at himself as the real enlightened comic, the truth teller.
Mm-hmm.
And he's looking at Rogan getting credit for stuff like that and saying, hey, why is he getting that credit and I'm not? What guys like Maron fail to realize is Rogan gets credit from some people like oh, look at all his interests. He's into elk hunting and meditation and yoga, and he has all these various interests, and he gets credit for that. He also gets shit on by a lot of people.
Oh, yeah.
As a fake alpha bro wannabe cerebral comic, you know? So he gets it from both ends, and I don't think Maron sees one of those ends.
I will say this in credit to Joe Rogan. He never, ever eats the trash. He never bites any of that shit.
He certainly does not, which as a podcaster, I wish he did more. Like, I wish he would get down in the mud. But just as a guy, like from a mental health perspective, good for him for never letting that get to him. At least it doesn't seem.
I think the reason that probably is, if he had mostly comics on, I think he probably would. But like, something could happen. The next person on will be like some physicist. And he's not going to be like, you want to know what this person fucking said about me?
Right. And people always say like, oh, I don't believe he doesn't look at the comments. I believe him for this reason. Joe Rogan never says like, oh, I don't look at the comments because those people are beneath me. He's like, I don't look at the comments because they would probably ultimately hurt my feelings.
Right.
Like when people say shit like that, I'm like, oh, I believe you. Like you're being honest about why you don't look at them.
I do the same thing sometimes. I look at the comments and I'm like, this hurts, but I just keep doing it.
Yeah, I'd like to stop doing this.
And taking a higher road intellectually than your career had implied previous.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, sure.
And there was part of me that thought, if I know you don't want to talk about this, and we don't need to talk about it, but in light of the Mencia thing, before I knew the full facts, and before I talked to you, and after I talked to Carlos, in knowing it, that there was part of me that thought, this was the fundamental problem, and I've been public about it a little bit before, is that in my mind, I didn't quite understand how somebody, who is doing a comedy that he insists has integrity could really, work on a show like Fear Factor for as long as you did, which in my mind, ushered in the whole the takeover of reality television, which, in a sense, put more comics out of work who are writers because, sitcoms cost too much. So in my mind, on some sort of level, that your television career, not news radio particularly, but Fear Factor was antithetical to, who you are now. And that I thought it was hard for me to accept that you were able to stand in a position of judgment of what comedy is or isn't, having done Fear Factor and the impact it had on the comedy business.
I think that's partly true, and partly there's part of that people do this when they have a beef with someone, is you come up with reasons that society will get behind as to why you hate this person.
Yeah.
I don't think Marc Maron gives a fuck that the writer for Yes Dear is out of a job because Fear Factor was cheaper to make for another network, I don't think Maron gives a fuck about that at the end of the day.
I was gonna say he's really, really stretching right now.
Yeah, like when I think that part is a stretch. The idea, like, oh, I was mad at Joe Rogan for Fear Factor because it puts sitcom writers out of a job.
Don't be mad at Joe Rogan. Be mad at friggin' ABC or whatever friggin' network it was on.
Be mad at the sitcoms. If Seinfeld debuted in 2008, I think sitcoms might be all right. You know what I mean? And then when you see shows that do resonate with people, like now you have Tires on Netflix that people get like excited for. And I know they're trying sitcoms. It's not for me, but maybe the middle of the country will respond to it. Like Leanne Morgan has a sitcom now, and maybe those will resonate with people. If they don't, I got news for you. They're not going to keep making sitcoms, Right. So I don't believe that Maron was really like, oh my God, this sitcom writer is out of a job. But I do think he looks at Fear Factor and what he's here's the real core of the argument, in my estimation. This guy thinks he's fucking Bill Hicks. He's watching people eat bull testicles on NBC. That's at the end of the day, that's what this is. And I totally get that from Maron, where he's like, how can you raise a guy like Bill Hicks up and say he's your idol and you want to be just like him, and then go on NBC and kind of sell your soul and do a job that admittedly, like if you listen to Rogan's stand-up from that time, even Joe says it was like at times kind of soul crushing to be in this job that took no real skill. Like no one was respecting him for it. So I think that at the end of the day, that's the real issue. Is Maron looked down at what Rogan was doing and liked goofing on it and making fun of it. I don't think there's any higher reason to it. Now, we could look at where we are in society today and say, did things like Fear Factor have an impact in dumbing down society? And I think Rogan has a pretty respectable answer to that.
An interesting angle, and I gotta think that angle's got to be coming from some weird animosity that you might have had to me already before this. Because,
correct.
First of all, I mean, how many sitcom writers are really comics? It's very few.
Well, they all. A lot of them started as comics. I'm just saying in comedy in general. You can't
say that that's taking away jobs, because it's an economic issue. And if I wasn't hosting it, someone else would have hosted it. And the real issue was there's a lot of shitty fucking sitcoms. There was Sex in the City, and there was fucking The Single Guy, and all these terrible. This is when I was on NBC. These terrible sitcoms, and they weren't getting good ratings. And all of a sudden, you'd put something like Survivor on.
Sex in the City taking unnecessary shrapnel there. It is.
Isn't that like an extremely popular show?
Yeah. I think Joe was misguided in that one, but
cheaper to do, and economically, it was way better for the networks, and they made a lot of money because they got great ratings. So I did the show.
Maron would have done that in 2 seconds.
Maron would have done Fear Factor.
Yeah.
No, I don't agree with that.
I think you would.
I do. I think Maron does have some integrity, but it's also like, I don't know, you were in The Joker. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, you were in some silly. Maron was in a movie that was, I don't even know if Todd Phillips would argue this, a direct ripoff of two other movies that already, like, blatantly a ripoff of Taxi Driver and King of Comedy. So, like, did Maron sit there and go, I can't, he's stealing from Martin Scorsese. I can't, you know what I mean? Like, we all have integrity that ends somewhere. And it's why I ultimately respect Jay Leno a great deal. Mm-hmm. Because Jay Leno sold out. And he'll tell you, yeah, that's what I did. But here's the difference. I'll say, like, I guess I sold out. I'll do a McDonald's ad or Doritos ad or whatever he did. He's like, the difference is David Letterman will tell you he didn't sell out. And then he will cash checks from CBS, and he will edit the things that CBS tells him to edit out. And when Bill Hicks is on and he crosses the line, Letterman will edit it out. When Harvey Picar is on and questions GE when he's on NBC, Letterman will tell him to shut the fuck up. So that's the difference ultimately between Leno and Letterman. Is Leno was like, hey, we're both cashing checks from corporations. I'm just being honest about it. You know, like Maron can talk about selling out and all that. The difference is he also cashes checks from all these major corporations, HBO and Netflix. And, you know, are you going to tell me that Maron uses stamps.com every time? Every time he wants to correspond with someone? You know, like we all sell out in a way, which is, but here's, because as I'm saying that, I realize here's the argument Maron does have. Is without people like Maron kind of trying to push back a little, God only knows where we'd be right now. Because I listened to Tina Fey was on Amy Poehler's podcast, and she made a joke like, "Oh, I'll really know you're gone when you do when you have like your own brands." And Amy Poehler was like, "Oh, like if I was selling my own rosé," and they laugh at how ridiculous that is. And then 5 minutes later, Amy Poehler does an ad read for fucking Ford or something. You know what I mean? Like just another massive corporation. So it's like, well, what are we even mocking now? Because we've all sold out. So without guys like Maron trying to gatekeep that in a way or police that in some way, we might have gone to some, down some crazy road that we couldn't even imagine. So I do appreciate Maron trying to hold up some level of integrity in all of this.
That's exactly the next clip.
successful.
I'm just trying to figure out, in terms of where your heart is now.
Integrity, you mean?
Well, I mean, it's not even just integrity. I'm not going to be that broad about it. I mean, I stated my intellectual argument, but obviously from where you're sitting, a job's a job. It was presented to you in a certain way. You had no idea it was going to become a cultural phenomenon that would eventually, really be about, getting, people to eat balls. It was as close to that that TV show in RoboCop. I'd buy that for $1.
Yeah.
I mean, it was as close to as moronic as you can get in television.
And while I was doing it, I was making fun of it. I mean,
no, I know, but still, like, and that must have, at least released some of the steam, because I have to assume, being the type of person you are and being on the path you were at, I know you were making millions of dollars, but there had to be something that was sticking in your craw. I mean, it had to hurt somewhere.
It didn't feel good. Yeah, no, I didn't enjoy it.
Because my question is that if Bill Hicks were alive, who was a hero of yours, how would he have said? What do you think he would have said about Fear Factor as a reality?
Oh, I'm sure he would have made fun of it, as I would if I wasn't on it. If I wasn't on it, I would have made fun of it for sure. But there's something that you can't really financial freedom, like real true financial freedom, is a really underappreciated thing.
Absolutely, and there's
worry.
There's a price for it.
Yeah, but the price was a few years of work. And while I was doing that work, I was only working 3 days a week, and I was still able to do stand-up and do a bunch of other things. And I did stand-up while I was on Fear Factor. And it was kind of screwy, though, because a lot of the people would come expecting to see the guy from Fear Factor, expecting to see, like, squeaky clean.
That was the burden of your Faustian bargain.
Yeah.
So it made me think a lot of, like, Bob said, and I don't know, I should go back and see if Maron ever talked to Saget about this, but, like, no one looks at Bob Saget hosting America's Funniest Home Videos or being on Full House and then sees that he's actually a dirty comic and thinks, what an asshole. What a piece of shit. Fuck Bob Saget. They're like, oh, that's kind of interesting that he was able to walk in both worlds like that. I actually kind of respected, in a way, that he didn't change his comedy just because he was on a show that does, where Dave Coulier is doing Popeye impressions and that has wacky catchphrases. I kind of like that Bob Saget is not, the definition of a generational voice in comedy or anything, but I'm saying he stuck to what he liked doing on stage while also being, America's Funniest Home Videos. Hey, look at Grandma fall down at the wedding. Look at this wacky thing. So I don't know what Maron's stance on that would have been. Maybe he also would have hated it, but I do look at it and say, like, particularly before, if Rogan did Fear Factor now, I think they got Johnny Knoxville to come back and host it, which it seems like in Johnny Knoxville's lane.
Yeah.
If Rogan did it now, after making $450 million doing something he really seems to enjoy, if he did it now for the extra 20 million or whatever he would get, then it's like, ugh, Joe, is there no cap on what the fuck are you doing?
What if he liked it?
Well, if he liked it, then sure. But I guess what Maron's saying is Rogan himself looked down on it. Like, in his comedy, Rogan was like, can you believe I'm doing this dog shit, basically? And that's where Maron judged him. But I would say, like, it was a job, and he was making fun of it while he was doing it. He wasn't going doing interviews and pretending, oh no, this actually is. It has a lot of integrity. There's a grittiness to Fear Factor that you guys aren't getting. He wasn't selling America horse shit. He was like, no, if you want to come watch someone eat balls, come do it. You know what I mean? And that's what, to your point, like, if he did like it, as long as he's selling it like that and not saying, oh no, it's this generation's Godfather. There's a lot of deeper meaning. If you watch it, it's actually about family and capitalism. Like, Rogan was never saying that. He's just like, no, it's McDonald's. Some people want it for a good. They want to turn their brains off for a while.
Rogan was talking about making fun of it, which is like, we could make fun of ourselves and all this stuff. So, like, Maron's almost doing the weird thing where he's like, well, comics are supposed to tell the truth on stage. Which
ultimately, I think that his problem with guys like Rogan, which is like, oh, they're these truth tellers. But Maron's kind of saying, we have to. I actually heard him in an interview say that. That's one of the Instagram clips I was pummeled with, was him going, we're supposed to be the truth tellers. And it's like, well, there's also fucking Steve Martin. You know what I mean? There's also Stephen Wright. There's also guys who are respected comedians that are just fucking goofy that you can watch and laugh at,
Yeah. And of course they move on, so we're on to selling out.
Yes, good. Okay, let's see if Joe is sold out.
And it is freedom in a capitalist system, and there's no doubt about that. I understand that, but that is also the very essence of the Faustian deal of selling out. That you get that, but in the aftermath of that, you're going to have to wrestle with what you seem to have wrestled with.
I get that, by the way. I get Maron's point here. So the idea of selling out has transformed. Like back in the day, like if you watch that Bob Dylan movie, like the idea of him plugging in his guitar, people were like, "Oh my God, what a hack, what a sellout." So like that concept has changed a tremendous amount. You know what I mean? Now you'll see a guy who was once an artist in Ozzy Osbourne pave the way for Paris Hilton, like in reality TV shows. Yeah. So like it is just a totally different world, and I don't know what selling out even is anymore. So I do get Maron's point where this thing could really spiral out of control, and ultimately it did. And like you have a celebrity that is the president now, and there's a lot of different reasons for that. But I think that's ultimately like how Maron would view it and say, like, look at where we are as a culture. And I think he probably attributes things like fear factor to that. I don't know where I really stand on selling out, because I look at a guy like Rogan, like on the surface, I might be more like Maron. And if you just showed me a sketch about an enlightened comic that also does fear factor on the side, or is watching people getting hit in the nuts or whatever, I would laugh at that. And I would agree with Maron's point. But when I hear Rogan talk about it, I'm not like, oh, this is a guy that has sold out or lost himself. He just doesn't have that feel. So I think there's more nuance to the argument than Maron is giving it. Could you just go back a little bit? Because I stepped on what Maron was saying there.
You get that. But, in the aftermath of that, you're going to have to wrestle with what you seem to have wrestled with, which is that, I know I did that, but I'm not that guy. And that guy, that did that was just doing that for money. Now I'm this guy.
I think I'm the same guy. I think you as long as you're saying while you're doing it that you're doing it for money and just keep pushing forward, there's certainly a price you pay as far as perception goes.
Do you feel like you contributed to the dumbing down of the culture?
No.
Really?
No
Why
doubt
not?
about it. It would have dumbed down without me. There's no stopping.
But isn't that a cop out? No way.
No.
So I think it is. Again, to me, it's nuanced. It's both. I think it is a cop out by Rogan to be like, no, that's silly. They would have gotten a different guy to host it. It's a cop out in this sense. You didn't have to be the guy to host it. You know what I mean? If all respectable people, if all voices and individuals that have any amount of respect said no to that, then it would have been it would have taken some credibility from what it was, and less people would have sought it out, I guess, is Maron's argument.
I think in reality, though, here's what happened. He got pitched the show and went, that sounds cool. And then he saw it and was like, oh boy.
It sounded silly and fun. And that is what he talks a lot about, that is it kind of got away from him. Mm-hmm. And Maron's point is, well, maybe if you had a little more integrity, that would keep you from doing things like that. Just in general, you would have said, no way, I'm not going near this because it's not what I do. It's a tough argument, because there are people that are morons that might be dumber because they had an outlet to watch Fear Factor and turn their brains off. Like, our generation probably is dumber than previous because we have the outlet of television and then social media and all these other distractions. So we have less things to turn to for enlightenment, as Maron would say. But I don't think Joe Rogan controls that. So I think it's a cop-out for Joe to say, hey, they would have gotten someone else to host it. But that is ultimately true. Like, just some other asshole would have hosted that. Joe Rogan couldn't put his arms up and say, no, stop the way culture is going. I don't think he had that power, certainly at that time. So for Joe to turn down money for his family, because don't forget, at that time, he wasn't generationally wealthy the way he is now. For him to turn down that money would have been stupid, just from an individual perspective.
I also don't think Fear Factor led to the dumbing down of the country.
Yeah, but here's the thing, is people were saying that at the time, like Maron. It was a thing, don't forget, this gets lost too. It was the type of thing society had never seen before. And then we asked for more of it, much like the Osbournes. Like, if you look at the Osbournes, that is a one-off. No, the Osbournes didn't dumb down society. But what happened was people were like, oh, this is really cheap to make. We can just throw this horse shit on all hours of the day and people will watch it. And now there's a generation of people that are obsessed with trashy reality TV and watching morons on their phones and just scrolling through that all day. And there are people that lose hours of their day scrolling through TikTok or watching Summer House or whatever the fuck that otherwise wouldn't have been doing that. I didn't mean Coleman's Summer House. That's very different.
Yeah.
No, you're laughing. You think I'm besmirching Jack Coleman, and I would not do that.
No, I think Portnoy will somehow see this clip and be like, "What the fuck?"
I meant the other one. God.
Yeah, no. Ozzy walked so Jersey Shore could run.
Yes, exactly. And could you say that has dumbed down society? Yeah, absolutely. Or was it the way we were always meant to go? I don't know. If Ozzy said no to that reality show, would we be living in the same world that we're living in? There's no way to answer that, but you could definitely make the argument that no, if people said, no, I'm not going to do that, I'm not going to lend my name to that, and the quality was lesser, because if Joe Rogan and people of that caliber said no to Fear Factor, that type of shit wouldn't be all you get on TV. So no, Fear Factor itself didn't dumb down society, but when you look at the influence it had, and same with Survivor and The Bachelor and all that stuff, there was just naturally dumber stuff on TV because people were like, oh, it's easier to make and people are going to watch it.
I also think that the host of Fear Factor has like nothing to do with the show, really. He just kind of stands there.
And that's what I agree with. And that's where I say, well, Rogan is cashing a check. And I think Maron's argument, again, would be if people like Rogan said no to that, it would have less respect inherently. You know,
I think if you had a Tesla robot host instead of Joe Rogan, the same thing would have happened.
Well, it wasn't possible at the time, unfortunately.
Yeah.
The show was hot dogs. Are hot dogs bad for you? Yeah, well, sort of. You shouldn't eat them every day, all day. But sometimes I want a steak, and sometimes I want a fucking hot dog. And sometimes I come home from a hard day at work. I want to watch some fuckheads eat animal dicks on TV. You know, why is that bad? It is what it is.
You tell me, why is that bad?
I don't think it is. I don't think it is. I think it's a choice. I think it's a choice and a broad spectrum of choices, and you can choose to, watch the Discovery Channel on some new fucking show on Hypernovas, or you can choose to watch Fear Factor. It's up to you.
Right.
But what it is mindless entertainment.
Yeah, but but in general,
no different from that than a sitcom. That's mindless entertainment too. It's just fun.
Sometimes, but I mean, in sense that, as somebody who is a critic of culture and somebody who is enlightened, what do you think of those people that choose to watch Fear Factor over and over again?
Well, I watched it too, and I also watched Survivor. Yeah, but I watched Survivor. I wasn't in that. I've watched a lot of dumb shows that I'm not in. I think you could definitely say that shows like that and anything that's broadcast in front of millions and millions of people is going to contribute to the way they think about things. And if you show dumb shit on TV and you lower the standards, you're definitely going to get dumb people.
Right.
But that doesn't necessarily mean they have to be that. They could also tune into different channels. They could also read books. There's a wide variety of choices that you could do with your life. You don't necessarily watch Fear Factor and become dumb. I know a lot of smart people that used to watch Fear Factor and thought it was ridiculous.
Right.
And they enjoyed it.
Well, they were watching it for the wrong reason.
There was the right reason for them.
Right. That's where Rogan really started to win me over, was just the idea. It's hot dogs. It's, it's something bad for you. And are there dumb people? Are there just empty heads that watched Fear Factor or watched reality TV? Of course. But are there also smart people that turn it on just to have on in the background, or just because they're tired and want something to fall asleep to, or whatever, or just because they might enjoy it for an hour and they turn their fucking brains off? Of course. So that's where Rogan started to win me over, is like, well, these things exist for their own specific reasons. And it's like a previous episode we did about Carrot Top, where people like Maron would talk about Carrot Top and talk about how it's for idiots. Mm-hmm. But then when you look at what Carrot Top's doing, it's like, well, it's funny. It's making people laugh. It's silly. It's funny. It's stupid. Carrot Top doesn't view it as like he's doing surgery on stage.
Right.
Carrot Top won't have you believe that he's some, generational genius, but what he is incredibly talented. He was able to captivate people for 30 years or however fucking long he's been doing it. And he makes people laugh for an hour and they go home happy. Are they talking about that act as much as, the first time they saw Dave Chappelle or Chris Rock? Probably not. But did they enjoy themselves for an hour? Now you could argue that you might enjoy yourself more at a Carrot Top show than the Dave Chappelle show.
Yeah.
Like, it's been 3 hours already. Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Wrap it up, Dave.
One of Carrot Top's props was a baseball bat with a straw. It was Darryl Strawberry's bat, so he could snort the third baseline. If you take him seriously, like,
it's fun.
Like,
yeah, but that's where Rogan started to win me over in this argument. Is like, I get the idea of Maron looking down at that sort of comedy. Is it dumber than a lot of stuff out there? Absolutely. But as long as it's meant to be, like, they're not selling you, to use Rogan's analogy, they're not selling you steak and telling you it's a hot dog.
If the person has an audience, there's a market for it.
Right. and this is what, to Craig's earlier point, this is what the people arguing against Fear Factor didn't see coming. Is you'll find 75 different Fear Factors.
Yeah.
You'll find TikTok channels that are just completely mindless drivel. And you'll also find scientists and, religious experts and people of all walks of life. And that's what, like, the internet has done that I don't know that we really saw coming in 2006 or whenever Fear Factor came out, is whether Joe Rogan tried to control this or not, there would one day be 7 million outlets for Fear Factor. And there would also be 7 million different ways to look up, the history of the Middle Ages, or look up information on every president we've ever had, like learn all these historical things, or art, or science, whatever field you want to go down, or whatever rabbit hole you want to go down. You're able to do that now, and that has both good and bad. And Maron, rather than embracing that, and people like Maron, they have not embraced that. They tried to fight against it. They're oddly conservative in that way, where, like, they'll bash conservatives for being against gay marriage forever, or things like that. And I'm on Maron's side on that one. But where Maron is rigid and doesn't see his own hypocrisy, is he's rigid on these things. Like, he doesn't look at how things are moving, and he wants to keep them, to his level of integrity that he has now. He doesn't realize that might change in 20 years.
But yeah, Maron also likes music that's not, it's like not the cool thing. So if someone comes up to him like, I also like Frank Zappa, he'd be like,
Zappa sucks.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of a hipster element to him.
Yeah, too. He's rigid on everything, including things he enjoys.
Yeah, and what's interesting about Maron is, like, here's what I love and hate about Maron at the same time. If you go on Maron's podcast and say that to him, he'll laugh. He'll love it.
Yeah.
He'll laugh and go, oh, I do that. I really am an asshole. But where he has never opened up is, like, you'll ask him now, well, why don't you go on Rogan's podcast and talk to him about it? And he'll go, why? Why would I do that? Well, because ultimately you'd have this conversation where it's two guys who, like, their philosophies are slightly different, but they're really, at the end of the day, not that far apart in what they're saying.
I think it comes to the point, though, at this point, Rogan probably wouldn't even have him on.
He should. They should both do it. Because
I think for the people, but if you're Rogan, why would you have him on it?
Honestly, not even for the people, because conversations like this, I think, are ultimately good. Like, I'm sure a lot of the comments are disagreeing with me or disagreeing with Maron or Rogan or whatever. I think that's ultimately good, because I think this is a complex issue. I don't think I'm 100% right, and I don't think whoever's commenting is 100% right. I think there's a lot of gray area and stuff like this, and I think it's good to talk about them, particularly in the manner these two guys are like, you hear this interview, and you're like, oh, they're capable of having this conversation in a civil way. So why not talk about it? Because I guess when you inject Trump into it, people's blood boils, which would be, I think, much more Maron than Rogan, if that were to happen. But, like, they're capable of having this conversation, and I wish they would.
Next, we have Taken Seriously.
Yeah, so, like, ultimately, could Joe Rogan ever be taken seriously? Which is a funny question to ask now. But it's something that he probably did deal with when he was hosting Fear Factor.
So there's a price. Yeah, I mean, would I do it again? I think I would, for two reasons. One, also because I think with a lot of comics, a lot of comics take themselves very seriously. You know, they take their ideas and they're
wonder who he's talking about.
You take yourself pretty seriously.
Yeah, nothing takes you out of that more than being the fucking host of Fear Factor. You know, no matter what you say, no matter how, you know, you're never going to start a cult.
But what I understand that, but you know, and that might be detrimental to your cult. And I know a lot of people would say, you know, there was a time where the idea of selling out, you know, had more resonance. That now it seems that people are like, hey man, you know, do what you got to do. If you can keep your personality, you know, it's cool. You know, do whatever commercial you want as long as you rise above the commercial. But I guess my big question, and you seem to address it a bit, is that being somebody who is as like, you know, passionately involved with the evolution of the human community, you know, and the idea that, you know, we are all operating on a series of wavelengths and share a lot of common possibilities for growth and really taking this thing to the next level. And that is where your comedy comes from. It's calling out morons and being proactive about what our biology enables us to do, that you couldn't have carried, that it must have been a fairly weighty cross to bear.
So what's interesting, and I think Maron, in a lot of ways, is speaking for the last 5 years of Rogan critics, particularly during like the pandemic and everything, where people were like, what does he think? He's a doctor? People never were able to accept the idea that Joe Rogan can talk to a doctor, a physicist, a scientist, you know, a very intellectual person, a professor, whatever. And he can also talk to Joey Diaz about shitting his pants or Bert Kreischer about getting too drunk. And he can have those conversations. And it doesn't mean Joe is either of those things. It doesn't mean he thinks he's a doctor or a fucking meathead. He doesn't have to be either of those. He can have the conversation and be invested in what they're saying and contribute to the conversation. That was my problem when people were talking about Rogan giving, quote, medical advice, is Rogan would say the word ivermectin, and he'd be saying it to a guy that went to a vaccinologist. Like a guy that went through a tremendous amount of schooling, and the guy would be like, yep, I actually agree with that. Or sometimes, no, I don't agree with that. And Rogan was capable of having those conversations. And what he did was blaze a trail for a lot of people that said like, hey, I can be a meathead that works out and also be conscious about what I'm putting in my body. And I can be all of these things. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think what Maron is looking at is there are a lot of people that want to be Joe Rogan. Maron thinks the average Rogan fan is the Liver King. Like, you know what I mean? Like just a fucking nut job, alpha psychopath.
I like the idea of Maron watching the Liver King shit from a month ago and being like, wait a second.
Typical.
Why is he going after him?
Oh, good point. Yeah. Why doesn't he like him? That's his idol. But no, I think Maron like thinks of the average Joe Rogan fan as the Liver King, and what Maron doesn't realize is like all walks of life, particularly before all the political stuff. Like now, there's, you know, in some people's mind, there's been some line drawn, but like, you know, I knew liberal people that listen to Joe Rogan. I knew girls, I knew guys, I knew alpha guys, I knew beta guys. Like there are plenty of different walks of life. Liberals, conservatives. Like Rogan had Trump on, he also had Bernie Sanders on. You know, like there are all these different walks of life that could appreciate what Rogan was doing. And that seemed beyond Maron's grasp because for a progressive guy, he oddly wants to put people in a box that he can judge them as one thing or another.
Here we have where I completely disagree with Maron, and that's Mencia.
Okay, so Maron did sort of an evolution with this, and I think he came around to Joe's side of the street a little more. But there was like an empathetic interview that Maron did with Mencia, where basically he was like, Joe bullied you. I think we talked about this in the Mencia episode.
Probably.
Or maybe it was in the Blind Mike Project at some point. But I think we talked about it I'll agree. Did Rogan go a little, in hindsight, did Rogan go a little hard on Mencia? I think so, probably. But was Rogan wrong? Not even a little bit.
I don't know, because they kind of talked to him before and he wasn't stopping, so they kind of had to do that.
Yeah, and here's the problem with Mencia is like, I think if you look at some of those videos, it's easy to be sympathetic towards him.
Mhm.
But then he's the same. Mencia is the same guy that did whatever. I think it was like a Showtime documentary or something, where that clip of him going where he's like, "Did I steal? Absolutely. I would take your shit, say some Mexican slur on the end, and bam, it was mine." Like he was like bragging about stealing.
My name
which I think might have been closer to the real guy.
Mhm.
So you get where Rogan was coming from, and Rogan even says like, "Would I have handled it?" Well, I think he'll say it in this clip, so I won't spoil it any further.
You know, it took you a while to come on this show because you were, mad at me on some level for talking to Carlos. Without
not at all.
Okay, not mad.
I was mad.
Aaron wrong again.
You said about me. You said it was two bullies arguing over bullshit, and that you said that you thought that the whole situation should have been handled by the community,
right?
And that it shouldn't have been aired publicly, which I thought was ridiculous because you had him on your show for 2 fucking hours and you exposed him
because the first hour I couldn't use.
You exposed him way more than I ever did in the 10 minutes of that show.
No, my show did not get around as much as that video.
You really think so?
Oh, not a chance.
I mean, as far as volume of humans that saw it, maybe, but as far as like in-depth exposure of the human being.
But let me tell you something. That's the one thing that happened because of that, and the one thing I'll admit in retrospect is that, I'm not sure you're not, in that situation. Both, were kind of button heads, and I didn't have an idea of your personal history with him. And also I hadn't been in that world. I don't live in the world of the Comedy Store, and I hadn't been. So my knowledge and the reason why I did that second episode was because I could not post the episode that I did initially because I didn't know what was really going on. And in retrospect, what I said about you, I felt was true, and in what I watched. And then you and I exchanged some emails, and I understand that the problem was a lot bigger than than what I knew, and that the community had tried to deal with him. But I think what happened on that second episode is, despite whatever you think of that guy, there was no way you couldn't see him as a person.
So Maron's basic argument, for anyone that didn't follow it necessarily, is hey, they should, like, if you watch that video, they're being mean to there's these alphas bullying Carlos, and what they should have done is taken him aside and talked to him, or talked to Mitzi or whoever was running the store at that time. And Maron didn't realize that they had done that, so he did a 180 on that. He kind of admitted he was wrong about some of that stuff. But again, this is to me another example. The reason I included that clip is, to me, it's another example of Maron making a knee-jerk reaction to Rogan and people of his ilk because he was bullied by them in high school, or whatever it is that has built this construct of who Joe Rogan and his cronies are, which to some extent is true if you look at guys like Schaub or Callan or Tony. But like, it's not true about Rogan himself, I don't think. He doesn't come off that way, at least. So it's another example of Maron looking on the surface and being like, "Oh, you're just an alpha bro meathead." And then once he looks deeper, again, he's proven wrong. So that's why it's a plea to Maron. He'll never see this, but if someone is watching this that can get him that message, go on Rogan's show, or have Rogan on your show, or whatever they're willing to do. Talk it out, because it seems so obvious that Maron's doing this thing where he's like, "Austin's bad. Have I been to Austin? No, I haven't been to the mothership yet, but I know it's terrible." And so he's doing this surface level judgment that, again, is being disproven, I think, in a lot of ways. So I think it's like wrong of him to be on this crusade against something he doesn't really seem to know too in depth.
We're on to our last clip here.
And so this is ultimately proving my point of how I think the conversation would go. Like I said, there's more politics injected now, so maybe it would be a little more volatile, but ultimately I think this is probably how they would end, because they have their disagreements. It's more or less a friendly conversation, a friendly disagreement, I guess, and this is how things end.
Good talking to you, Joe.
Good talking to you too. I'm glad we did this.
I think we had a good conversation.
Yeah,
and I think we know each other better now.
Absolutely.
All right, man. Thanks.
So that's how it ends with Joe, and now he's going to do his wrap up, where he says what I think is the truth. Maybe he'll say he was bullshitting now, but like, ultimately, I think this is how he walked away from meeting with Joe Rogan.
Okay, that's our show. See that? Me and Joe are friends. We just need to talk about a few things. Wasn't even that tense at all. He was rather sweet. I'm finding that these days people come on my show and they act a little more low-key, a little more human than they do in their own worlds. I guess that's what I'm doing here.
So I find out when I meet the guy, there's more to him than being the host of Fear Factor. It's crazy.
Weird.
No shit, Mark. So like my stuff with Maron, I'll be curious to see how people react to this. So maybe I will put it out as a free episode because I'm curious your guys' thoughts. Guaranteed, I'll get people that are like, "Oh, you're just washing Rogan's balls," which I don't know what advantage. I don't think Joe's going to see this, so I don't know what advantage I'd have to doing that. But I think there's a lot of intricacies to this debate here, and there's aspects of it I agree with Maron, but where I agree with Joe is the philosophy of not taking this shit so seriously.
Right.
Where Merritt seems to be completely rigid and he will not move on a lot of this stuff. And then when he talks to the guy, he's like, hey, he's a sweet man. I actually liked him.
Oh, I didn't realize.
Yeah. So if you're a patron, let me know. You think I should put it out for free? I hate being like, oh, it was actually a good episode, so I'll put it out for free. I like people's feedback. You know, I'm curious what the people think. So you guys on Patreon, let me know if you mind. And if you want to say like that, if you want the power to bully me around in my decisions, become a member on Patreon or YouTube. You get early access and bonus episodes. We're going to have to play the Quincy drinking game again soon, by the way. We have a couple of those left. So we do wacky stuff like there for members. I'll be in a new studio by the time you guys are hearing this. Not that that really matters to anyone, but the background will be different. That's all that'll change in your lives. And I appreciate you guys supporting Why You Laughing. So subscribe, comment, share, 5 stars, all that stuff that helps more people find the show wherever you get podcasts. We appreciate you guys. Blindmike.net is where you get all those links. And verygoodshow.org is where you can support Craig. I don't know if anything exists there, but go check around, you know?
Neither do I.
Go snoop around and see if you can find anything back there. I bet there's a lot of good stuff hiding. So support the boys. We appreciate you. And we'll talk to you next time on Why Are You Laughing?
Zip it up and zip it out.